Hello, everyone, and welcome to 15 Questions with an Archaeologist, brought to you by the National Park Service, Southeast Archaeological Center. I'm Josh Guerrero, and I'm your host, and this is the show where we're trying to collect as many interviews as we can, where we ask 15 questions with an archaeologist. Each podcast episode will feature one archaeologist answering the same 15 questions. I think it's going to be fun, and we just might learn something. And joining me today, I have Dr. Karen Bellinger, aka the Time Scribe, and the host of the Working Overtime podcast. So, Dr. Bellinger, thanks so much for taking the time for joining me today, and welcome to the show.
Thanks, Josh. Thanks so much for inviting me.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this conversation. You know, you and I, we've been connected for a good while in this wonderful world of social media. So I'm glad that we're able to get together to collaborate. So even though you do have, your brand, the Time Scribe, and you do host the Working Overtime podcast, you also wear many other hats in the realm of, anthropology and archaeology. So, to kick this off, how about you just tell us a little bit about yourself and, what is it that you do?
Sure. So yeah, I do wear a lot of hats, and that's by choice. I come from a background in very, sort of typical academia, which we could talk about later if you want to, but It's not where I decided to stay after finishing my dissertation work. And I even did a postdoc, so I kept on going with all that. And much as I love that work and I love to teach, I just really realized that I'm a popular communicator and a popular educator above all. I really believe in that. And to me, that's the most important reason to study the past and to think about it and to excavate sites which are, destroyed by excavation, frankly. I think it's our job to share what we learn and what other people learn and that we learn about as broadly as we can. So yeah, I'm a communicator, I guess. I do host and co-produce a podcast called Working Overtime, where we kind of take the topic of work as a lens on society, overtime, which is the overtime. It's not working extra hours, as some people might think, and across cultures. And it's really just looking at interesting jobs that people did in the past and that may still exist today, maybe not at all, or maybe in really different forms. And we start kind of drawing comparisons and lines between past and present experience. And, the great thing about that is I feel like the more things change, nothing has. It's kind of reassuring as an anthropologist, I think. But when I'm not doing that, I am fortunate enough to have the opportunity to participate in a number of television shows, factual TV for Discovery Channel and Science, UK History Channel and Smithsonian. And I really enjoy that. It's a very different kind of thing than preparing a conference paper in some respects, but in others it's not, because I'm very careful always about being factually correct. But there's a mandate to tell a good story too, which I think is great and makes it all much more interesting, both for me and hopefully for my audience.
Oh, I'm sure it does. Absolutely. So right on. So you kind of mentioned that you're sort of looking across cultures and kind of just sharing many different things from around the world. And that makes me curious to ask you this next question. And that is, if money were no object whatsoever, what type of archaeology would you do? What would you really kind of commit to focusing on?
Yeah. I have to say, again, I said, to me, archaeology, it is fundamentally destructive. You remove the site and all that we have left is what we document, hopefully very carefully and professionally. We've been trained to do that, and we publish it in whatever form. But I think on the flip side, one of the things that we don't hear so much in the climate crisis is how our past is actually being destroyed as much as our future is threatened.
Yeah.
And, I think that raises sort of all sorts of possible ethical questions. Well, I'm not saying one is more important than the other. Obviously, ensuring our future on this planet is probably more important. If somebody put a gun to my head and I was looking at one of my children asleep next to me, but there's a very interesting opportunity posed frankly, by the melting of glaciers, for example. There are sites coming to light in alpine regions, where we've kind of assumed that humans didn't actually spend a lot of time because it was hard to get to and it was harsh climate and all of this. Ötzi was this very famous mummy that came out of the Tyrol region, and I think it was like 1991. And, there was an amazing discovery around this. And subsequently, other sites are just kind of melting out of the mountaintops alongside the garbage that unfortunately has been left by mountaineers. So that's one thing. I'd love to undertake some kind of survey with that. And another site category that really interests me that's affected by climate change and melting is the Kurgan burials in the steppes of Eurasia, sort of stretching from Siberia to the Black Sea into China. There's this terrific region that was, occupied thousands of years ago by what you could only describe as a Game of Thrones-esque tribe, the Scythians. I mean, they were amazing horse-mounted warriors, fearsome. But the women apparently participated as enthusiastically if what we find in some of these incredible burials is anything to go by. They were terrific artisans as well. They produced beautiful jewelry and wooden artifacts and cloth and finely woven and felted objects, which, normally don't survive, but these Kurgans are buried in permafrost, and they kind of seem to understand, they mummified the remains, and they understood that there was this cold effect that would preserve what's inside. They heaped stones and they built these raised structures in such a way that they have survived until now. The alpine regions and these steppes are disproportionately affected by the melting and the heating of the Earth's temperature. And so, those are both kind of emergency situations where I think we need to get out there and capture whatever we can before it's lost to us. And those are expensive sites to visit. So if money were no object and someone offered me a check, I'd say that's where I want to go.
Yeah, it sure sounds like that'd be quite the logistical nightmare to make it out there. And I'd have to say that's a first, Dr. Bellinger, for someone to bring up that part of the world, because I think, I do agree with you, is that, places like Siberia, where it's pretty much just an endless, stream of winter throughout. Now it's kind of creating these opportunities for us to go there. And have you by chance had a chance to hone in on this area, maybe within the realm of your TV presenting work or anything along those lines?
I haven't actually been to either of those sites, but I worked on projects concerning those cultures and sites to do with them for TV, and it's really lit a fire in me. So I'll get there.
Yeah, all in due time, I'm sure.
Got to get those grant proposals together. And well, it's a timely subject, and I think there is something to be said for it. I mean, my sort of dream television project would be a series that investigates heritage threatened by climate change.
Right on. All right. Well, to kind of learn a little bit more about your background, let's go in time a little bit here. And I want to ask you, where did you receive your education, and why did you choose to study at the location that you went to, or maybe it was even a couple of locations that you had studied at?
Yeah. Well, I got my bachelor's degree in English literature from Yale, and it was a very kind of theory-oriented department. So we obviously read a lot of books, but everything was focused on kind of, okay, how do we make sense of literature? And it was, literature from all the different points of view, from the point of the author's point of view and perspective and their message and the reader reception, and then the text standing on its own. And, we got into a lot of actual social theory through that. And it proved to be my ticket into grad school, because I graduated, I graduated with my bachelor's degree in English, and I took increasingly more history, kind of without even realizing it as I went along. And I woke up one day, senior spring, and realized, darn it, I'm like one credit short of a double major in history. I'm not one of those people who knew from the age of 7 I wanted to be an archaeologist, but this interest in human culture and products of culture and what it means really resonated with me in literature. And I wanted to look more at, okay, what about everyday life? And, sort of, I don't mean to say real life. I think stories are really important. But I applied to a number of programs, and I always knew I wanted a degree which had a focus in historic period archaeology. And a lot of those programs, at least at the time I was applying, were masters only. And I didn't get into any of those because I didn't have any of the credentials, and I was so disappointed. And I lo and behold, I was admitted to the anthropology department at New York University with a free ride and a stipend. So I said, I'm there. I applied as a cultural anthropology student, and it's a pretty easy shift from kind of a theory-heavy literature background into at least what my department had said as he interviewed me. And then I was a little sneaky, I guess. I switched to archaeology after about a term. But I had to do all of the really rigorous theory and the anthropology, the whole four-field approach, and I'm so glad I did. It really was the most amazing preparation for any time period archaeology. So my actual field work has focused on the relatively recent historic past, in terms of my, down and dirty in the field for weeks at a time. And I thank my stars every day that I got that really great background.
All right, outstanding. You make a good point that, not all archaeologists, it doesn't always start at a very, very young age. And that certainly wasn't the case for me. I don't think I mentioned this when you and I were connecting, but my bachelor's was actually in elementary education, of all degrees. Yeah. But then after 2 years of living in West Africa as a Peace Corps volunteer and just being exposed to this entirely different culture from my own, that kind of sort of shifted my focus to anthropology, eventually honing in on archaeology. And that's what led me to York. So sometimes it does take maybe a little bit, later on to actually finding the passion for this career field. So, so I guess if anyone's out there and listening, it's never too late, I guess.
No, and I don't know. I just think in the modern world, the modern economy, even before COVID crushed everything and everybody's dreams and their ability to connect on the most basic levels, I think we've been headed towards a place in which being kind of nimble and not just able but willing to shift is going to really be important. And I don't think that there's any one path to any one career anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so that's a little bit of your education background. So let's kind of move along in the timeline here. And I want to ask you, you've kind of mentioned a little bit about taking interest in this area of Siberia that you were talking about earlier, but could you also tell us about some of the interesting sites that you've gotten to work on so far?
Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, first of all, I'll say I first, as I think you and I talked about offline, I learned to do archaeology with the Park Service myself in Colonial National Historic Park. I never remember if it's historical or historic, so I'm sorry, Park Service, if I got that wrong, but I've always loved working with you. And I spent many years doing summers down around the historic triangle in Chesapeake, Virginia. So Jamestown, Yorktown, Williamsburg. And what I really loved, and it's probably what put me on the path I am now of being, a more publicly oriented communicator, is interacting with the public. All of those sites had a mandate to engage with and, let's be honest, entertain as well as educate the visiting public. So I loved that. And I thought they were exciting projects, all of them. Whenever you're doing research, you're excited about what you're doing. It doesn't exactly match up to what people think about with ancient Egypt, for example.
Sure.
But yeah. I did more recently have the opportunity to work in the Atacama Desert in Chile and looking at a big, broad site. The scale's so different from little micro scales of colonial America. But we're talking, a site that essentially spans miles around this gigantic petroglyph. There are like 5,000 of them in this area, very arid, and they're preserved over thousands of years. And if they're not naturally preserved, there's actually some indication that local populations work to keep them looking tidy. They're loose stones and such, but they're very important cultural part of this landscape. But this one project I did that was amazing, that did with science discovery, is we were just kind of trying to figure out who actually built these petroglyphs. This one in particular is gigantic and it's out in the middle of nowhere. A lot of the others were sort of in groupings together and near obvious settlements. But this was really out in the middle of nowhere. There was just no sign of where anyone could have lived to produce it. But yet it clearly was oriented in terms of it had this crown with rays coming out, and its arms and legs all pointed in a very clear calendrical fashion. I mean, it was sort of like a flat Stonehenge. Oh. And it was obviously used to track the seasons and to think about planting. And indeed, there was evidence for long abandoned, quite elaborate irrigation structures in the area. No settlement, no settlement, no settlement. So we're driving around, we're looking at satellite images, and happened to be driving to go to a town to get some supplies, driving up along a dry riverbed. And I'm just looking out the window and thinking, and I start to see these things, these little heaps that didn't really make sense. And they're just like interspersed with modern buildings. And I said, can we just pull over the car here? And lo and behold, there was a settlement there with a lot of different clusters of unmistakable domestic artifacts. And it was just so exciting because, it's like so often in archaeology, you don't find at all what you're looking for. But, if you're lucky, you do find it, just not where you thought you would. So
right. Yeah.
That was really exciting. And what was great is that we were able to work it in and, so that was fun. That normally I don't actually find field archaeology itself to be such an aha moment. I know that so crushes people's expectations and it ruins the romance.
You just hurt my feelings. I'm just kidding.
Field work can be kind of dull.
It can be at times, yeah.
Yeah, probably the best day I had in the field that day. So.
Oh, I can imagine so. And I'd say that that's also another first to come up on the podcast. Well, the historical triangle right there is a first, as well as the desert in Chile. So I guess just kind of dialing things in a little bit here, you briefly just brought up artifacts. So let's talk about some of those. What would you say are some of the coolest artifacts that you ever recovered? And that may be a loaded question, but I guess I'll just ask you to think of a few.
It's like everybody asks that. It's okay. You know what? I actually do have one. And it brings me back to the historic triangle after all that I said about it not always being that exciting. But I was teaching field school, working at one of the sites in Colonial Williamsburg in the historic area. It's like tourist central, and we were digging in a well and a wedding ring came up.
Oh, wow.
And it was amazing. I mean, it had a date and 2 names engraved inside it. And I am a storyteller at heart. My English literature background is very much a part of everything I do in approaching archaeology. I mean, obviously I try not to go crazy out on a limb and speculate wildly, but because it is my culture, historically removed, but I know what this means. I know what this wedding ring means. And I could imagine all sorts of possible scenarios of how this thing ended up there. And all of them are poignant, well, was it just lost, as the rope went too fast or something? Or was there a fight and did somebody go and just throw it in a peak of anger? I thought it was just such a beautiful relic, aside from being a beautiful thing, but a relic of real people and a relationship that you could instantly relate to.
Right. Because, you got to imagine that maybe relationships like in the past, probably at the core of things wouldn't be too different from how, relationships would be now. So kind of thinking about putting yourself in the past and of course, I'm not sure exactly what I would do to, have a wedding ring of mine end up in a well, but, that's kind of the fun of it though. There's a lot of ways you can think about this.
Archaeology is the rediscovery of things that are thrown away or lost. That's it. That's, to me, that's as nuggety as you get, like the core of it. There's all this romance about it, but it's rare. in many kinds of archaeology in many parts of the world that you uncover anything beautiful. People think about King Tut's tomb. Well, yeah, that stuff wasn't buried. It was enclosed and kept inert and all of this. And yes, there are environments that preserve things in whole, such as these kurgans that I have admitted a great desire to explore in the Scythian plains. But most of it's broken. It's broken trash. And it's a tremendously fascinating process to try to come up with interesting insights from it, but certainly doesn't present itself full blown too often the way a wedding ring in a well does.
Right. Absolutely. And yet another first to come up on the podcast. We're getting a lot of firsts today, Dr.
Wow.
Bellinger.
Oh, dear. And that's so funny. I'll be the first to say, I hate people looking for the first and the oldest because I don't think that's so interesting, but I'm glad. Good. Yay.
All right. Very cool. All right. Well, shifting gears a little bit, I want to talk a little bit about mentorship because I've certainly found that mentorship is critical within archaeology, not only with my own development, but the development of other up-and-coming archaeologists as well. But who has been your mentor, or maybe even had a couple of mentors along the way, and how have they influenced you throughout your career?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, me particularly, I think I sort of backed into the whole thing in a way. I mean, I knew I wanted to do it, but I didn't come to grad school with some of the preparation other people in my cohort did. I literally had never taken an anthropology or archaeology course as an undergrad. So the woman who became my key dissertation advisor at NYU certainly took me under her wing and gave me some tips and helped me figure out how to channel my really excited but kind of naive work. And that's Dr. Rita Wright from NYU. She was always great. And I couldn't actually do the kind of archaeology that I wanted to do in New York or with any of the faculty in the department at the time. So I just took myself down to Colonial Williamsburg and the College of William and Mary and basically showed up on the door of Dr. Marley Brown, who is the former director of archaeological research at CW, as we call Colonial Williamsburg, or did. It's a very different organization now. I don't think they even have a Department of Archaeological Research anymore, but they did back in the old days. And Marley was amazing. He probably had the biggest influence on how I think about archaeology and how we should approach it, and certainly planning a research project. I'd go in there and, well, first of all, you sort of had to get in the door. He had this shtick where he sat me down. I asked for an appointment with him, and I showed up for my first summer field school. And he sat me down and he's like, "So you're not serious?" And I was like, I'm looking around. Who told you? Because of course we all have imposter syndrome sometimes, right? I particularly did, just again. And I said, "Oh, why do you think that?" And he said, "Well, you're married and you've come from New York and you just showed up here." And he was pushing buttons, and he sort of laughed about it months later when we were good friends at that point, because we were, and I went many times, sat across from his desk, and I understood that this was sort of the game he played. But he's one of the smartest people I ever met. And just kind of, that was his way, I think, of just cutting down and having me be very kind of honest and open about what I wanted and how I thought I'd get around it. And truly everything from then on that I brought to him, he gave it to me straight. He pulled no punches, but I walked out of the office much better informed for it, for sure.
Yeah, right on. As you're describing him, you made me think of some of my, Marine Corps instructors that I've had that were very just, kind of, serious, stern. Yeah, didn't pull any punches, serious and about the game. So I don't know, you just made me think of that all of a sudden. But I've come to find that leaders like that I've had in my life usually were the ones that I tend to look on with, much more fondly and kind of take like the most lessons from, I'd say. So when they kind of go about it that way. So right on. All right. So what I want to ask you about next, and you kind of mentioned that you've done some archaeology field work in other parts of the world. So, what country out there do you think handles cultural resource management and archaeology the best? Like, who just seems to get it? What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, that's a tough question. And I think so. I have lived mainly in the US or the UK. I'm in the UK now. I think the UK does a great job of explaining why this is important. I think that the wide variety of, for example, primetime TV programming that has been popular for years and years and years over here is a testament to that. I mean, back when it was I think it did a 20-year run, like Time Team was incredible.
Right.
And it would be on 3 times a day in primetime slots, reruns, obviously, a lot of them. But, networks choose what to broadcast based on what they know their audience wants, and so I think they do a great job here in the UK of communicating why it's important. I don't know about the economics of it. I'm not sure if they're, effective in getting all the funding they need to do all of the commercial archaeology. I'm sorry, I'm not really in a position to say that. I feel like in the States, we could do a lot better with that, with both, really, with communicating why it matters and funding it.
Sure. Yeah. That was one thing I've noticed when I was studying in the UK myself, was that just public involvement was, quite prevalent there in the
huge.
UK. And I certainly do remember, it's just anytime I did turn on the telly, as the Brits would call it, there would be the occasional rerun of Time Team. I think by the time I got there, though, this was back towards the end of 2015. I don't know if the show was wrapped up by then.
Yeah. You know what? It was wrapping up if it hadn't already by then.
Right.
Yeah. But and that's just the most obvious example. And it's funny. I mean, people outside of the UK haven't even heard of it, which is hilarious because it's so iconic here. They're doing a little bit of a reboot. I'll tell you, the person you should talk to about this question is Natasha Bilson. She's terrific. She's a colleague of mine who also does a lot of TV work, and they've just started filming a new series very similar to Time Team.
All right. Very cool. So, all right. Well, shifting gears yet again, what I also want to talk about is volunteers. Volunteers are another critical component to archaeology as well. So throughout the fieldwork that you've done, have you had the opportunity to work alongside volunteers or maybe even done some volunteer work yourself?
Oh, I've definitely had volunteers working with me. I guess if doing field school counts as volunteering, you basically pay for that, right? I haven't personally volunteered. I haven't gone on Earthwatch or anything like that, but I have had a lot of involvement in projects where there have been students or volunteers, and it's invaluable. I think that's actually how you spread the word best as a professional, by showing people, right? Archaeology isn't what you think it is. It's not dinosaurs. It's not, relic hunting. It's not Lara Croft. And it's actually not as romantic as you probably think it is. But it's so important, and it's critical that it be done this way, because it's destructive, and I think it's just important for as many people as possible to understand why this is, it's a pursuit worth supporting financially and politically and however else one has a voice.
Yeah, agreed. And of course, here in the South, I'd say the romance fades away really fast as soon as you get swarmed by mosquitoes or, a tick latches onto you. So the romance is just gone at that point.
The 110% humidities. Yeah.
Right.
I know it's a very hot, sweaty days down there myself.
All right. Well, the next couple questions that I have for you, this is going to be getting into what I call the core of what it means to be an archaeologist. And the first of those questions is, what is just the best part about being an archaeologist?
I'm such a nerd. My favorite part is the post-excavation analysis. I love nothing more than pouring through, like getting as much data as possible of all different kinds, whether it's, you know, the artifactual stuff, it's the field notes, it's the photographs, it's the comparative site analysis, it's the site survey, historical records. I especially love old field notes. Like if you're digging somewhere where other people have dug, I really get into that. And those are my aha moments, much more than in the field usually. And I love it. It's just it's a really challenging puzzle to put together most of the time.
Sure, yeah.
And 90% of the work is done at a desk somewhere before or after you excavate, actually, no matter how much time you spend in the field.
Right. Yep. Quite the process. Absolutely. But on the flip side, though, what would you say is the worst part about being an archaeologist?
Well, it can be really boring when you're in the fields, and it's hard work. I mean, it's digging ditches and stuff. It's, I mean, it's like, you know, at a certain age, you understand why people direct and why there are maybe volunteers who, right? It's very hard on you, you know. And I think right now, well, first, to me, academic archaeology wasn't the best fit for me. I didn't enjoy all of the kind of political jockeying around departments and about funding, and it got frustrating. I understand. I mean, it's a business like any other business at the end of the day in some respects, right? It costs money, it's labor intensive, and you know, all of these things are inherently political sometimes. I think today we see kind of a curious resurgence of concern around issues of heritage and history and representation and questions about who owns the past. And, you know, as an anthropologist, my top priority is that all versions of the past are put forward for people to consider and to hear. I mean, you know, luckily we're past the sort of colonial and post-colonial dominant narrative being the only one out there. But I think that we're kind of struggling of how to manage that, you know, and I think this question of, well, what does it mean that there's a representation or a monument to the past that is, we know it's offensive and it's abhorrent. What do we do about it is actually a very complicated question. And I'm certainly not in favor of just leaving statues to people who did evil, terrible things in the past where they are unexamined. But I think there's a conversation to be had about what's a more effective way to make this into a learning moment. Can we somehow not erase a past that actually did occur while explaining to people why, you know, look, we've come a long way, baby, frankly, and this is not how we see the world anymore. And all of these reasons largely to do with capitalism and colonialism created the world that we live in today. So, you know, I'm glad to see all the debate about these issues. I think sometimes they're not used to the effective end they could be. And that's just something we need to all figure out. It's a big challenge for everybody right now.
Right. Yeah. There's certainly a lot of issues to take in consideration, and also a lot of dichotomies surrounding those issues as well as too. But I think that's definitely a deep rabbit hole that, you know, unfortunately probably won't be able to get to here, but something to think about.
We're not solving that tonight, Josh, but someday, no, this is something people are, and it's great. It's a good thing on balance. It's hard work. But
yeah, absolutely. Doing it. So, okay, well, let's see what the future has in store for us then. So, all right, and what I have for you next, this is a tribute to The Right Stuff, which is a wonderful novel written by Tom Wolfe.
I love the movie.
So I would like to ask you, who is the greatest archaeologist that you have ever seen?
Oh, yeah, who's my Gordo Cooper, right? No, that's actually easy. So, Dr. Audrey Horning is one of my dear friends, but also the person who basically taught me everything I know about actually excavating, actually doing archaeology, and then making something from it that is meaningful and important. So just starting from the field stuff, I mean, she's the tiniest person I know probably. And when she's got a pickaxe going, the dirt flies. I mean, she can bust sod and bust that tidewater clay like you've never seen anybody. And it's beautiful and perfect. So there's that. Perfect, technical skills. But she has just gone from amazing project to amazing project, and her career is really all about looking at how we can use archaeology for good and to promote peace in the world. Frankly, she works a lot. I mean, a lot of her earlier work, and it continues, but based in kind of Atlantic world expansion, and so that's by its nature, that's colonialism. But she's done a lot of great work in Northern Ireland and conflict archaeology, where she actually is addressing these issues about this long-standing religious dispute and the violence around that. And she's been a fellow at a peace institute, a global peace institute. I can't think of the name of it, but I mean, to me, that's just the greatest thing. She's as really makes as big a contribution to our understanding of where we could go in the future as where we've been in the past.
Right. Okay. Right on. And the next couple questions that I have for you, these are questions that I'm sure all archaeologists have been asked at one point in time. And the first of those is, have you ever found a dinosaur?
You know what? Josh, my headphone just stopped working.
Uh-oh. Can you hear me now?
Why did it do that? You were asking me an interesting question, I think. Oh, I'm so sorry. Hang on. Hello?
Yep. Can you hear me?
All right. I'm so sorry.
Uh-oh.
Hang on. They just stopped working. Hello?
Yep. Can you hear me? You got me now?
Oh, you came back.
Okay. All
Technical difficulties. I'm so sorry. Would you mind asking that again?
Oh, of course. And like what we mentioned earlier, I don't think I'm going to leave that out of the final ending, because that happens, technical difficulties. So.
Actually, if you leave it in, here's the funniest thing is that the guys who co-produce the podcast with me, they actually do the technical stuff on the other side of Zoom. This happens to me every time. They will laugh.
Well, that's just the nature of podcasting. Not everything's going to go perfect all the time. So a little bit of behind the scenes for
when
our
it involves
audience
me
today.
and technology, it never goes smoothly.
All right. But as I was asking, there's questions that all archaeologists have been asked at one point in time. And the first of those is, have you ever found a dinosaur?
I have found a dinosaur, not in the ground. In fact, he's over here. Hang on a second. I'm going to get him. So this, I'm not actually all that proud of this story, but this is Simon. And Simon has a great sort of Manchester accent. I can't do it, but two of my children were born in England and they can do it. So we were at a wedding in Heidelberg, and it was held at this amazing fraternal hall, like this some kind of student place. And I'm embarrassed to say it was a wedding. I had had a little bit to drink, and Simon was on a shelf, and I saw Simon, and Simon came home with me. I stole him, basically. I stole a rubber dinosaur.
All right. But Simon, very, very, very cool. Yet another first to come up on the podcast. Wedding finds.
Yeah, probably wasn't very good of me. I've actually felt guilty about it forever, but you leave Heidelberg, and I lived in Boston at the time. I wasn't going back anytime soon. Maybe I'll have a pilgrimage to return him with apologies.
All right, very cool. All right, the next question that I have for you that goes along these same lines, and that is, how do you feel about Indiana Jones?
I love Indiana Jones. Who doesn't? Come on. I mean, it's Harrison Ford for one thing, but all right, that aside. The Indiana Jones movies are like the original Star Wars to me. I saw them in the theater real time as a kid with my dad. And I remember my dad dragged me to see Indiana Jones movie with my stepmother. And we sat there and we didn't want to go. We rolled our eyes when the fake boulder came down early on in the movie. This is so stupid. Let's just leave. And of course, within 5 minutes, we were so hooked and loved it and all of that. Does it have anything to do with archaeology? No, but I still love it.
Right. Well, I mean, at the end of the day, it's not really an archaeology film. It's an actual an adventure franchise, you know.
It is. And it's interesting, though, how he's sort of become the iconic fictional archaeologist in that respect. I guess it just goes to show you how big a space there is between the impression and the reality. I don't know.
Well, if, you know, we can be associated with Harrison Ford in his heyday, you know, hey, I'm all for it. So
no problems here.
All right, right on. All right, well, I got a couple more questions for you, and we're going to kind of start wrapping up on a little bit more of a serious note now. And I would like to ask you, you know, what advice would you give young people, or, you know, maybe just even anyone for that matter, who may be seeking to make a career in archaeology?
Yeah. Well, I think that the answer right now is really different than it would have been even 5 years ago. You know, I think I'd say go for it, and maybe you will end up in an academic or commercial archaeology career. Maybe you won't. You can do so many things with the preparation that an archaeology degree, well, particularly one in an anthropology department, gives you. You know, anthropology is the study of human culture, comparatively speaking, whether it's in the present or, you know, with ethnography or archaeology in the past. And I think, well, I said earlier that I just think any career path that a person embarks on today is just going to be bendy and windy, and it's going to take you places you never expected. And
right,
I
absolutely.
think being open to that is important. Academia is really tough right now in all fields. And I think in archaeology, it's really bad from what I see and what I hear from colleagues. Even at sort of the point I decided to branch off and do the kinds of things I'm doing 10 years ago or so, it was then. So that said, that probably sounds discouraging, and I don't mean it to. I mean, I think whatever somebody is interested in doing in this day and age, they just need to go into it with eyes open and learn how to learn as much as they learn whatever subject that excites them. Like, whatever excites you at the moment, dive in and just do everything you can with it. You just don't know where it's going to lead you or whether you'll end up doing something different. But if you focus on the process of learning how to learn, you'll always be fine.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, that's just, you know, the reality of the situation, because, you know, I'm still pretty new to the game myself. And, you know, it's a lot of, you know, temporary positions, seasonal term positions.
Yeah.
And it, you know, you may be in the game for a while before you find something a little bit more permanent. But, you know, if it's what you really want, you just got to be willing to stay the
go
course.
For it. Yep. Yeah. And I think most fields are actually moving towards that if they're not there already, which is, I think, both scary and sad in some respects, but also full of possibility, you know?
Yeah, definitely. All right, well, I got one last question for you, Dr. Bellinger, and this is a pretty big one too, this final question, and that is, what can the general public do to help protect archaeological sites?
Oh, loads. I mean, well, you know, there's that that little glib saying, see something, say something, right? And I think it's about, if you see something suspect that suggests the possibility of terrorism or other kind of violence, go tell somebody. And I think that's an equally valuable mantra. I mean, on the most basic level, if you see something in your backyard, don't start digging. Contact your, you know, depending on where you are, your local governmental body or academic outlet, that museum, something, and say, hey, want to send someone over to check this out. And by the same token, if you see something that you feel is clearly of some value and it's being damaged, you know, and archaeology is not just about things buried and visible underground, but historic structures and really anything that is important culturally and historically to your community. It's everybody's responsibility to protect our shared cultural heritage. And I think just regardless of whether you see something suspect or interesting or whatever, I think it's just a life-enhancing thing to sort of acquaint yourself with what's in your own backyard and community. And there are so many organizations that exist to make that possible. And I think most of them are very excited to have constituents interested. So museums, heritage sites. If you're in the United States, all these great properties administered by the National Park Service have terrific visitor centers and a lot of volunteer programs, right? Educational things.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
As I remember, I think there's so much more out there than people even realize. And I think that the internet is a great equalizer, and just doing a little search in Google brings up all sorts of amazing virtual resources too, particularly during this COVID mess. I think there's been a move towards digitizing historic archives, records, collections to make a broader reach for people who maybe aren't in a geographical catchment site to go visit a site or a museum or what have you. But there's fantastic resources out there now to just dive in and see how you can get involved while learning more.
All right. Outstanding. Well, Dr. Bellinger, that's it. That's all 15 questions all wrapped up. But before we close out here, where can our listeners go to connect with you? I know you're out there in, social media and the internet space, and you also got, your podcast as well. So how can we reach out and connect with you, and where can we find the podcast?
Yeah. Oh, I'd love that. Yes, please. I love to connect. I love to make friends over cyberspace. It's amazing. You can connect with people from around the world, and it might be somebody who's really right up your alley in terms of what you do, or totally different. It's great. So I am on Twitter and Instagram as The Time Scribe. And my podcast is Working Over Time, and it's on Instagram as that. And I think the Twitter handle's something weird like Working OT Series because of, character limitations. But
right.
Just Googling my name, Karen Bellinger, or Working Over Time podcast should come up with something.
All right. Well, either way, I'll get all those linked up in the show notes for this episode so the listeners can find it there for their convenience. All right. Well, Dr. Bellinger, I want to thank you very much for taking the time for joining me today. I know we're kind of doing this with a bit of a time difference with you being in the UK and me here in Florida, but I really appreciate you being here and sharing all this with myself and the listeners. This has been great.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks so much.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, everyone. That's our show for today. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at NPSSEAC. That is at NPSSEAC. And be on the lookout for more episodes of 15 Questions with an Archaeologist dropping at the first of every single month. And please remember that since we work for the government, we spell archaeology without the A and the E. So it's just a little bit different when you read it in the title. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'm Josh Guerrero, and I'll see you in the next episode.